Savannah looked at me in front of everyone and said, "She's not family anymore." I didn't cry. I smiled. I smiled because I knew something they didn't. I knew that the truth always has a way of finding its own stage. You see, this wasn't just a wedding. This was the moment they had planned to erase me, to make me invisible, to rewrite every sacrifice I had ever made for Jackson. For years, I had poured my heart into him, nurturing, protecting, loving him unconditionally. And yet, here I was, standing in the middle of a hall full of friends, relatives, and strangers, humiliated by the one who called herself my daughter-in-law. Savannah's voice cut through the music and laughter like a blade. "She's not family," she announced, her eyes sharp, her smile cold. Every head turned. Every eye fixed on me. Cameras flashed. And in that heartbeat, time seemed to stop. I could feel the whispers behind me. Some shocked, some amused, some silently judging. My son, Jackson, he didn't move. He looked down at his hands, as if my presence was an inconvenience he couldn't face. And Savannah, she was basking in her victory, thinking she had won. Oh, how wrong she was. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I didn't even shed a single tear. I simply smiled. Not because I was weak. Not because I was defeated. But because I had already made my choice. And that choice would change everything. I smiled because the greatest power isn't loud words or public displays. It's patience. It's knowing when to step back, when to let people reveal themselves on their own. And Savannah, she was about to reveal more than she could ever imagine. Everyone saw my calm. Everyone wondered, is she really okay? And they were right to wonder. Because in that moment, I wasn't just a humiliated mother. I was a storm waiting to unfold. And the smile you saw? That was the quiet before the reckoning. The smile that would hold every secret, every truth, every carefully hidden plan, ready to change the course of that day, forever. I walked out that day quietly, but the story was far from over. What they thought was a retreat was actually the first move in a plan that would expose everything they thought I couldn't see. And by the time the night ended, nothing would ever be the same again. Stay with me, because what happened next, no one saw coming. Savannah's perfect image, her control over my son, the pride she so confidently wore, all of it was about to crumble. And the reason why, well, that is something you need to hear. You might wonder how we got here, why a mother could be humiliated at her own son's wedding. The answer is simple. I built everything for Jackson. From the moment he was born, I dedicated my life to him. I gave up promotions, nights out, even my dreams, to make sure he had everything he needed. I remember spending nights hunched over spreadsheets, calculating tuition fees, tuition loans, and how I could afford his piano lessons while still paying the bills. I quietly funded his dreams, never asking for recognition, never seeking applause. Every graduation, every scholarship, every small victory, those were the results of my sacrifices. I didn't do it for money or fame. I did it for love. Pure, unwavering love. And when he fell in love with Savannah, I supported him quietly again. I even helped fund the wedding without ever announcing it. I wanted his day to be perfect, even if it meant my name remained in the shadows. Respect, that was all I ever asked for. Not a word of praise. Not a single thank you. Just respect. And yet, in the grand hall filled with flowers and music, Savannah thought she could erase years of love and effort with one cruel sentence. I never forced Jackson to see the sacrifices I made. I never demanded recognition. But standing there, hearing Savannah humiliate me, it cut deeper than anyone could imagine. It wasn't just about pride. It was about truth. About a mother whose entire life was spent making sure her child never lacked, only to be called irrelevant by someone who hadn't earned the right to speak. And if you're watching this, if you've ever been invisible to someone you gave everything to, then you already know the feeling. The quiet rage, the hurt, the burning desire to right what's wrong without losing yourself in anger. If you believe a mother's sacrifices should never be erased by pride, subscribe now, because stories like this disappear when good people stay silent. I often wonder, how did we get to the point where love and loyalty could be mistaken for weakness? How did my years of sacrifice become so easily dismissed? That day, I realized I had two choices. I could fight in the moment and cause a scene, or I could step back, observe, and plan a way for the truth to shine brighter than any humiliation. And as I walked quietly from that hall, I knew my next move would be the one that no one expected, the one that would protect my son while exposing Savannah's arrogance in the most unforgettable way. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, there were signs, small, almost imperceptible, but my heart never missed them. Savannah wasn't just meticulous, she was controlling. She chose the guest list herself, carefully deciding who was worthy to witness her version of perfection. People who mattered to me, people who loved Jackson, were quietly left out. When I arrived at the venue that morning, the seating chart was already rearranged. My seat, pushed to the very back, almost hidden. And when I politely questioned it, she smiled and said, "It's better this way, Mom. You wouldn't want to distract anyone." Distract? I had spent decades raising the man who was marrying her. And suddenly, my very presence was a disruption. She rewrote the family narrative in subtle ways. Stories of my sacrifices, of Jackson's childhood victories, became exaggerations. The truth became inconvenient. She called respect old-fashioned, claiming that in her world, the past didn't matter. And every time I tried to speak, she smiled condescendingly as if to remind me I was not in charge anymore. Later, Savannah cornered me privately. Her words were meant to be a warning, not a conversation. "Smile today," she said, eyes cold. "Don't embarrass us." I nodded. I smiled, on the outside. On the inside, I felt the stirrings of a storm she could never imagine. The irony of her. And then it happened, the moment I had felt in my bones. Savannah stood in the center of the hall, the room falling silent as every eye turned toward us. With a voice as sharp as glass, she announced, "Cora, you're not family anymore. In fact, you're toxic and disruptive. You need to leave." Every guest froze. Cameras flashed. Whispers erupted. I looked at Jackson. My son. The boy I raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, and he didn't move. He avoided my gaze. His silence spoke louder than any words. He chose peace over truth. And in that silence, I felt a pang of sadness, but not defeat. I smiled. Not because I agreed with her. Not because I was weak. I smiled because I had decided in that moment I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. "Thank you, Savannah," I said, my voice steady, "for reminding me that some lessons are learned too late." And then I walked out, calmly, quietly, with every eye still on me. The whispers followed, the shock lingered. Rage. Curiosity. Confusion. But I carried my dignity like a shield. If you're watching this and still not subscribed, ask yourself, would you stay silent too? Subscribe now, or explain in the comments why dignity doesn't deserve support. They all thought I was powerless. That I would quietly disappear, humiliated, as Savannah had planned. They didn't know I had spent years preparing. Not for revenge. Not for pride. But to protect my son. Hidden away in this room were documents that could change everything. Financial records proving how much I had quietly invested in Jackson's future. Legal papers, wills, contracts, and a sealed trust ensuring he would never be left vulnerable. Evidence of Savannah's lies, carefully collected over months. Everything she had twisted to her advantage. I had recorded, cataloged, and safeguarded. Most mothers would cry, shout, or storm back into a room filled with judgment. I did none of those things. I stayed quiet. Observed. Let the lesson unfold naturally. My goal was never to humiliate. It was to arm my son with the truth, in a way that would open his eyes without shattering the fragile bond he still had with me. This trust wasn't about money. It was about clarity. About security. About showing my son that loyalty and love are not just words to be thrown around, they are actions, decisions, and boundaries. And when the time came, the truth would speak louder than any wedding speech or hurtful insult. The irony is, the same people who tried to humiliate me had no idea they were playing into a plan that would protect the man they thought they controlled. Savannah believed she had power. But she didn't realize the real strength always comes quietly and with purpose. I had smiled, walked away, and held my dignity close. I thought the storm was over. But storms have a way of revealing hidden truths, and sometimes you don't even have to touch the lightning yourself. Mrs. Cora. I just realized the payments for Savannah's arrangements weren't cleared. There are discrepancies in the contracts. I'm so sorry, but I need confirmation. And just like that, a seed of truth was planted. The careful lies Savannah had built, her forged references, her manipulated stories, her grand tales painting me as toxic, were unraveling. Not by force, not by anger, but by reality itself. I didn't need to attack. I didn't need to humiliate. I answered honestly. Confirmed facts, corrected misunderstandings. And in doing so, the web Savannah had spun began to tear. Debt she had hidden. References she had forged. Conflicts she claimed had never happened. And the worst, the twisted narratives she fed to my son, hoping he'd believe me incapable, unworthy, or somehow inferior. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth has its own way of speaking. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, it began to whisper to Jackson. Not through confrontation. Not through dramatics. But through undeniable proof and the inevitability of reality catching up with falsehood. It's ironic, isn't it? Those who tried to humiliate me in public were now exposed not by my hand, but by the truth itself. And all I had to do was remain patient, observant, and loving. The kind of love that doesn't punish, but protects. By the time the week had passed since the wedding, Savannah's carefully constructed world began to crumble. It started quietly, little things at first. The vendors she had trusted, the ones she believed she could charm with her smiles and half-truths, began to call. Payments that had supposedly been handled were frozen, contracts left unsigned, bank transfers held up because the truth behind her debts and forgeries finally caught up with her. Whispers traveled faster than she could. Friends she thought loyal began to distance themselves, questioning her stories, questioning the very fabric of who she was. And then, of course, she turned to me. Savannah, standing at the edge of composure, accusing me in tones sharp enough to slice through the air, trying to pin her downfall on me. She called me bitter, manipulative, even vindictive. She accused me of orchestrating every single problem, painting herself as the victim, as if I had somehow willed the world to turn against her. I listened quietly, because that is what patience teaches you. You learn to let words bounce off you when your strength is in restraint, not retaliation. And when she finished, when her voice cracked under the weight of her own lies and exhaustion, I smiled softly and said, I didn't expose you. I stopped protecting lies. That one sentence, it was simple, but it carried the weight of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every moment I had held my tongue for the sake of my son. It was truth wrapped in calmness, and it shattered the foundation she had tried so hard to build. The irony was delicious in the quietest way possible. She had humiliated me publicly, believing power lay in the voices and eyes of others. But the collapse of her image wasn't loud. It wasn't a spectacle. It was the quiet unraveling of deceit that no charm, no manipulation, no carefully curated smile could hold together. And all the while, I never lifted a hand against her. I never sent a message to expose her. I didn't need to. Truth has a way of finding its own stage. I watched as her arguments dissolved, as her accusations became increasingly desperate, as friends and family quietly questioned her credibility. And through it all, I kept my eyes on my son, on Jackson, who was beginning to finally see, the reality of the woman he had married and the mother who had loved him more than anyone else in this world. Savannah's attempts at guilt, at manipulation, at rewriting history, fell flat. Because while she had tried to erase me from the story, I had quietly safeguarded the truth. And here's the lesson I want everyone watching to understand. Sometimes, the strongest power isn't in retaliation. It's in restraint. It's in love. It's in the courage to smile while the world tries to humiliate you, knowing that time and truth will do what you cannot, or choose not, to do. And when that happens, when the lies crumble around someone who once seemed untouchable, there is no need for anger, no need for malice, because justice, in its quietest form, is often the sweetest revenge. It was hours after the collapse of Savannah's carefully built world when Jackson finally found me. The man who had once refused to meet my eyes during the ceremony now stood before me, a storm of confusion, guilt, and hurt written across his face. For the first time, he was seeing the truth, not the story Savannah had fed him, not the narrative of lies he had chosen to believe, but the reality that had existed quietly all along. And it hurt him more than I could have ever imagined. Jackson began with apologies, half-formed, clumsy, as if the words themselves were foreign to him. I didn't know, Mom. I thought she was telling me the truth, he stammered. And in that moment, I saw the weight of his own choices, the consequences of his silence. He had stayed quiet at the wedding, chosen peace over honesty, chosen to protect a lie rather than confront it. And now, standing there, he realized that his silence had allowed someone else to humiliate the woman who had given him everything. I could feel the pull of old instincts, the urge to console, to comfort, to shield him from the consequences of his own mistakes. But I didn't. Because love doesn't always mean shielding someone from the truth. Sometimes, love is standing firm, holding the line, and letting someone face the reality they helped create. I looked him in the eyes and said, Jackson, I am not here to attack Savannah, and I am not here to rescue you emotionally. You must understand that every choice has consequences. And right now, your silence has caused harm. Not because you meant it, but because truth ignored never stays hidden forever. He tried to interrupt, tried to defend her, tried to shift blame again, but I held my ground. I spoke slowly, deliberately, making sure he understood that this wasn't about anger, or revenge, or bitterness. Love, I told him, doesn't mean protecting someone from the consequences of their actions. Love means telling the truth, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, and even when it means standing apart to make sure the lesson is learned. His shoulders slumped, his head bowed, and for the first time, I saw genuine comprehension, not just regret, but the dawning understanding that actions, or inactions, have real power over lives. And then came the silence. The kind of silence that fills a room with understanding. The kind of silence where no one needs to speak because the weight of truth is finally acknowledged. Jackson didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't plead for comfort. He simply stayed there, absorbing the reality he had avoided for too long. And I stayed there too, not to punish, but to let him feel the lesson of honesty, responsibility, and the consequences of misplaced trust. This was the hardest conversation we had ever shared, but also the most necessary. To everyone watching right now, if you've made it this far, if you've been gripped by this story, ask yourself this: would you stand in that silence? Would you face the consequences of your choices without deflecting blame? And if you're still hesitating to subscribe, let me tell you, every story of dignity, sacrifice, and the courage to stand for truth deserves a witness. So subscribe now. And if you won't, say it out loud in the comments. Tell us why stories about integrity, courage, and the quiet strength of a mother's love don't deserve to be heard. Because these are the conversations we all need to see, the lessons we all need to learn. Jackson stayed silent for a long while, but that silence was no longer avoidance, it was reflection. And in that reflection, I could see the beginnings of change, the slow acknowledgement that truth cannot be hidden, and that love is sometimes the quietest, most powerful force in the world. After the conversation with Jackson, I realized that revenge was never truly what I sought. I didn't need to humiliate Savannah publicly or create a spectacle. What I wanted was truth to be recognized, for lies to crumble under their own weight, and for my son to see clearly what, or rather who, he had allowed into his life. And so, quietly, I let events unfold as they were meant to. The wedding continued, but not as Savannah had envisioned. The carefully orchestrated show of perfection unraveled in subtle, almost invisible ways. Guests whispered among themselves, noticing discrepancies, mismanaged arrangements, missing details, hints that something was off. Savannah, who had so confidently controlled the narrative, suddenly realized that control was an illusion. Her reputation didn't collapse violently, but silently, socially, like a puzzle falling apart one piece at a time. Friends who had admired her suddenly questioned the stories she had spun. Vendors who had accepted her words without proof now sought confirmation. And the truth began to seep into every corner of the wedding world she thought she had mastered. Jackson, for the first time in weeks, regained his own sense of agency. He was no longer the silent observer, no longer the passive participant in someone else's scheme. He began to step forward, subtly correcting misunderstandings, acknowledging mistakes, and choosing honesty over appearance. I watched him from a distance, my heart both heavy and proud. This was my son, finally seeing the power of discernment, the necessity of truth, and the weight of choices he could not ignore. And me? I stepped back. I had paid my dues silently, endured humiliation with grace, and allowed lessons to unfold without anger or spectacle. There was no need for dramatic revenge. The satisfaction came not from seeing Savannah fall, but from knowing the integrity of my actions, the honesty of my words, and the protection I had quietly provided for Jackson. I left the wedding with peace in my heart, the weight of public judgment lifted from my shoulders, and the knowledge that love does not need to be loud to be victorious. And with that, I walked away, not looking back, knowing that some victories are quiet, some triumphs invisible, and some lessons only reveal themselves to those who watch closely and choose wisely. And in that silence, the story was complete, the lesson learned, and love, true love, endured. As I look back on that day, the flowers, the music, the eyes watching me as I walked out, I realized something important. The humiliation wasn't the moment Savannah spoke. The humiliation would have been if I had lost myself trying to defend my dignity to people who had already decided not to see it. That is why I smiled. Not because I agreed. Not because I forgave too quickly. But because I understood something she didn't. I understood that truth does not need applause. It does not need an audience willing to listen right away. Truth is patient. It waits. It moves quietly through conversations, through realizations, through moments when people finally ask themselves the questions they were afraid to ask before. And when it arrives, it doesn't knock. It settles in. I did not win because someone else lost. I won because I refused to become smaller in order to be accepted. I refused to trade my integrity for temporary validation. I refused to shout, to accuse, to beg. And in that refusal, I protected something far more valuable than pride. I protected my peace. Savannah believed power came from control, from shaping narratives, from speaking the loudest in the room. But real power comes from restraint, from knowing when to step back, from understanding that people eventually reveal themselves without help, if you simply stop covering for them. My son learned something too. Not because I scolded him, not because I punished him, but because truth reached him when he was finally ready to see it. And that is the hardest kind of lesson, the kind no parent can force, only allow.